All right. I think we'll get started while the rest of the crowd joins in. But welcome everybody from around the world. I see that we have our audience from across different parts. Given the times that we live in, in the virtual new normal, even the panelists on this webinar today are from literally across two different points of the globe. I'm right now in Mumbai, India, and then Sriram is in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And we're super excited to have everybody over here to talk a little bit about building futuristic AI products and product management within AI. I'll give a quick introduction about just me and what we're doing here with Haptik, and then I'll turn it over to Sriram to give a quick introduction as well. My name is Aakrit Vaish. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Haptik. We are a conversational AI platform. Been in business a little over 7 years. Presence and clients across different parts of the world, including US, India, Asia, and Middle East, and Europe. We are a part of Reliance Geo platforms, which has been in the news this year because of the fundraising and the partnerships that they've done with Facebook and Google. We got acquired about a year and a half back.
By the way, that is an understatement to say it has been in the news this year, right? That's like saying 2020 was slightly unusual. That's you folks have been everywhere.
Yeah, that's like saying that. Yeah, that's like saying that 2020 has been a great year. But Geo platforms has definitely been top of headlines. Let's just put it that way. As part of what we're doing over here, Haptik has a knowledge sharing initiative that we call Conversations on AI. The idea over here really is to have experts from the industry, people who have something to share based on what they've learned, kind of come join us and talk about some best practices. And on that note, I'm really excited to have a really old friend, and we'd lost touch.
Wait, do you mean old as in like I'm old, or
no? It's our friendship is old.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that. I just want to clarify that for everyone.
Sriram is very young, guys. Sorry that I should edit that. If anything else, I look older. A friend, an old friendship where Sriram and I first met close to 10 years back, and then both of us ended up taking very interesting paths in our careers, and then we reconnected recently, and I instantly felt that we must have him join us here. Before turning it over to him to introduce himself, quick ground rules around the session. So we'll obviously talk, and there'll be like a fireside chat format where we'll be talking about just products and things and AI in general. Please keep sharing your questions while we're in conversation. I'll try and take during the conversation itself, and some I'll take at the end. So there's enough time kind of for everything. And typically with these things, the 45 to 60 minutes usually just flies by, and hopefully it'll be fun for everybody. So on that note, Sriram, would be great if you can just give a quick introduction about yourself and more interestingly, what you're up to these days.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Aakrit. It's such a delight to be here. And thanks to everyone. I was just telling Aakrit that it's so weird in some ways to do these formats where typically I would love to just see each one of you and be able to interact with all of you. So please do let us know if we're boring you, or if you're like, oh my god, these two folks are like are terrible. And this is a lot of fun when it's interactive. But thank you so much for your attention. A little bit more about me. I grew up in India. From Chennai. And came over here to the US about 15 years ago to work at Microsoft. And since then, kind of been in several large tech companies. I spent many years at Facebook building a lot of mobile products there, which I'll talk about. I spent a lot of time working on their mobile ads, their app install ads. I started and launched their ad network, the Facebook Audience Network. spent a lot of time there. Then did something similar for Snapchat, now called Snap, down in LA, where I helped create and launch their ad platform. And for the last 3 years, until January, I helped run large parts of consumer product at Twitter. And so if you folks use Twitter, everything from home timeline to all the ranking and relevance to growth, I was very lucky to oversee. Very fun, interesting times, and hopefully we can get into some stories there. And sometime last year, I decided that, hey, I've done social media for many years now, and I want to do something different. And I had I started doing some investing, and been lucky to start working with some very fascinating founders. By the way, I obviously missed out in not investing in Aakrit 5 years ago. So yeah, I'm obviously a terrible investor there. Yeah, and about like 6 to 8 months ago, I said, hey, maybe I want to try something else different. And try being an investor for a little while. So for the last few months, and of course, this is all in the COVID context. So this is me sitting in my bedroom and not having really stepped outside of a short, small radius for the last 4 months. I've been mostly investing, helping out my portfolio companies, trying to work with founders of both early stage and later stage companies. So that's what I'm up to. But again, after this, I'd say it's been amazing. I think last time we met in person was maybe 9 years ago in the streets of San Francisco. So it's kind of amazing to just see your journey, what you've built with like Haptik and just everything. So it's just amazing. So thanks for having me, but I just want to say that too.
No, absolutely. Thanks so much. We're all big admirers, of course, of the work that you've been able to do, and just the body of products that you've been able to accomplish. Sriram, I've always wanted to know one thing.
Oh boy.
Yes, this now starting, but I've always been curious about one thing that particularly as a product person, right? Obviously, what you end up doing, where you go, the products you build, have to really inspire you, right, as an individual. Like you really need to love the problem that sort of you're trying to solve. So was it always a thing for you that social media in general became like, okay, look, I really it was one of those things where you believe that connecting people through the power of internet was like a big theme? Was it something that you actively followed, or did it accidentally happen where you kind of landed up at Facebook and then sort of just went from?
Oh, it's purely accidental. I wish there was a narrative where when I was a little kid, there is a montage sequence that was like, someday I'll grow up and I'll connect the world. That's what I dreamed of doing. No, that it was not like that. I think for me, I always been interested, I would say, in how regular people use technology. And though my first years were at Microsoft, which I enjoyed, I worked on cloud computing, which is a lot of fun. But I always felt that I spent so much time thinking about looking at how regular products work, looking into user experiences. And when I was at Microsoft working on cloud computing, I kind of missed that whole consumer interaction flow. And only when I joined Facebook was I lucky enough to get exposed to that at scale. Facebook was an amazing experience for me on many levels. It was the first sort of high velocity growth company I was a part of. It was the first large consumer platform I was a part of. And I was lucky enough to kind of build multiple products there. So, and that's where I think I discovered how powerful social media is, or rather more broadly, how powerful it is to bring people together. Like even right now, like, look, we are doing something which would not be possible 10 years ago. You and I, in 2010, if we had to video stream, just to each other, do a one-on-one conversation, as opposed to a lot of other people in the world, we would not have the infrastructure physically to do it. This would be laggy as hell. It would be buffering. You'd be like, Sriram, you'd be on Skype and there'd be frames dropping. It would not be fun at all. So, but I think we are connecting, with each other, and and hopefully the other people are kind of getting some value out of this. So I realized, I think during my time at Facebook and Snap, that I love that. And then I think that one thing just led to another. So first it was in advertising, but then it was like, hey, ads is super fun and we can chat about that. But I also really want to work on the consumer core product part of it. And that's where I got a chance to do that in Twitter, which is also amazing. So purely accidental, and only in retrospect can I draw this connective line. I had no such grand plans going in.
No, that's incredible. So let's dive into some of the products, right? So at Facebook, I believe you were a part of kind of you built the product around the entire audience network. And I know that has a lot of direct relevance to today's topic, right, which is using data intelligence and sort of figuring out what's the right way to kind of serve the right ad to the right person. What was the problem that you were trying to solve with fan, as you called it back then, and then also how did you think about approaching it with the data that was available to Facebook?
Yeah. By the way, first of all, I would say I was very intimidated when I saw the title. Like, Aakrit had asked me to do this thing, and I said, yes, fine. It'll be fun. Aakrit's a friend, let's do it. And then I saw the title and the marketing, and I was like, oh my gosh, because it said, there's going to be this focus on AI, and I think one of the things, Sriram is an AI expert. I was like, I'm not an AI expert. I barely have like Hello World working in TensorFlow.
I always say this, that the biggest and the best AI systems that have been created in the world are some of the ad serving systems. Ultimately, and that's what the truth behind AI is, right? AI is not always just a Siri or an Alexa or a Boston Dynamics robot, right? I mean, honestly, and I mean this because when we overlapped a little bit when we were working together back in the day, right? I mean, what is AI? It's essentially taking large sets of data and trying to make sense out of it and make it useful for consumers, right? And I think Fan back in the day, right, was probably one of the earliest examples of it.
Yeah. So I think, and so the way I think about it today, I was like, actually, in some ways, what a lot of these systems have common is they were able to use large data at scale. So here's some context, right? So this was happened in 2013. And you kind of go back in time, Facebook had just gone public as a company. They'd gone public 6 to 8 months ago before that. And to put it mildly, their stock market reaction had not been great. They had opened, I think, at around $50. The stock price had crashed to around $25. There were all these questions about like, hey, can Facebook, which had made, which is having good traction on desktop, ever figure out mobile advertising? Now, of course, think about the conversation on Facebook today, very different, right? But in 2013, this was the scenario. And so there's kind of this big push to figure out mobile advertising and mobile monetization. So the story of the audience network actually starts a little bit before that with app download ads. I kind of like, you obviously, you have some history with too. So Facebook, me and a small team of people, we started building out a way for advertisers, people who had apps on the App Store, to advertise their apps on Facebook. So for mostly these were gaming developers. If you had a game out there, let's say you were a Clash of Clans or any one of the popular games back, Candy Crush Saga.
Zynga Poker, for example.
Yes, Zynga Poker, Candy Crush Saga was another big one.
Yeah.
And you wanted to get an audience, and what you would do is you'd come to Facebook and you'd use our ad platform to run an ad and to get new users for your app. And that turned into an amazingly good business for Facebook. In a very short period of time, we made it $1 billion business. And it was a very substantial part of Facebook revenue. It probably still is. And about a year or so in, we ran into an interesting problem, right? We were only able to spend about like 10% of the money advertisers wanted to spend with us. If advertisers wanted to spend $100, we were only able to spend 10 because we could not actually show more ads to people. And we kind of looked at it and we're like, hey, why is it happening? We're like, well, Facebook doesn't want to overwhelm your feed with ads. We only want to like have like, you have enough content and then you have enough ads. So we're running out of space. So that was one problem. So this was in terms of like, how do we actually, take advantage of this fact that advertisers want to spend more money with us because they're getting amazing results. The other issue that we were seeing was all these developers and publishers, folks like the New York Times, folks like Shazam, who were all finding that their audiences were shifting to mobile, but they're not actually really making money either. So, and they were like coming to Facebook and saying, hey, can you help us make more money and monetize our mobile experiences? And so this came this thing where, one day we made a pitch to like Mark and Cheryl saying like, hey folks, we have this opportunity here where we can solve both problems at the same time. One, obviously with this huge revenue opportunity where, people want to spend more money with us to, get their app in front of developers. On the other hand, what if we took those ads and instead of showing them inside the Facebook app, we start showing them inside the New York Times app, inside Shazam, inside Pandora, and so on and so forth. And, and Mark was happy with it. He said, fine, here's a small team, go figure out what you guys want to do. And we went off, set to work. And what we did was we had a lot of data. Right? Like, so we had, Facebook had data around a lot of user interest. So for example, when you did things on Facebook, Facebook had a sense of like what you were interested in. And this was really key because at the time, a lot of mobile ads were very poorly personalized and targeted.
Yes.
So you'd open up a mobile app, you get this like totally irrelevant huge banner or huge interstitial takeover, and it was just annoying people. And and it was kind of this bottom of the barrel experience which nobody really loved. Publishers didn't like it, but they had to do it because they wanted to make money. Users did not love it. And we came on the scene and we were like, hey, we can do something better. And I think this is one of the keys to, I think, a lot of this AI, which was like, we can make the experience better for people who see those ads. And the way we're going to do it is twofold. One was we're going to use all this data that Facebook was able to infer on what your interests were to make ads personalized. So for example, if you were into, say, sports or NBA like I am, maybe we can show you a sports game. Or maybe we can show you an ad connected to NBA or connected to LeBron. If you loved, say, for example, like we knew who casual gamers were, we could show them better casual games. So one was we can show you a better experience by training all these machine learning models on what people are interested in. That was one. And then the second part of it was we want to have a better experience for these ads themselves. Like the common way ads showed up inside apps then was you'd see a little banner at the bottom of your screen, which you hit X on.
They just took what was available on the web and try to paste it back on.
Yes. And we said, well, that doesn't look like a good user experience. And more important, that's not what works on Facebook. Ads work on Facebook because the ad actually looks like the rest of Facebook itself, right? You scroll, it looks like any other content and feed. But no other real publisher had figured out how to make that happen. And so we said, maybe we can give people a native ad format where we can take, for example, let's take, like, say, in a Zynga poker, and let's say you're a poker fan, we can take that ad, but the New York Times can display it, so it makes it look like part of the New York Times experience itself. So, and now the third part of the puzzle was how do we then train this whole loop? So every time when somebody sees one of these ads, when they click on it, download the app, or don't click on it, we train our models and make it better. So we can say, okay, you know what, that ad format is not working, or those set of people are not the right audience for this ad, and so on and so forth, and make the system better. So, obviously I'm oversimplifying here, but we launched a test. We ran to a few publishers. We saw some promising early results, and then it was off to the races. And within like a couple of years, it was $1 billion business. Now it's like a huge revenue driver for Facebook, and so that was like a really, really fun experience.
No, that sounds amazing, and obviously I have lots of follow-on questions, but maybe I'll try and restrict to a couple. You talk a lot about data, right? And obviously, one of the things is that if I'm New York Times and I have my mobile app, and if I have to sort of start showing ads, the reason I would be incentivized, like you said, to work with, let's say, a Facebook and get Facebook's kind of advertisers, the only reason is because probably the ads will be a lot more higher quality, both in terms of the ad experience and most critically interest, right? Mm-hmm. Because if it's a more relevant ad, then my user will likely click on it more, which means the user benefits, advertiser benefits, I benefit as a publisher. So, one of the things, and I'm guessing this is where like the whole black box piece comes in, right? One of the things I guess everybody's been really curious about is back to the topic, right? Which is there's so much data that Facebook had back then, and even now it's even more, right? Whether it's interest, whether it is just sort of basic things like demographics and things like that. One of the problems in machine learning models like these can always be where do you even start, right? And that's when a lot of times product managers particularly are, okay, look, like as a product manager, I'll go and be like, this is what I want. I want that at the end of the day, these interests are done and people click a lot more. But then the next question, let's say your typical, your data scientist team or your machine learning team asks is, okay, look, where do you want me to start, right? Do we to take a certain, do we let's say look at parameters? Do we look at filters? Do we start making personas out of these? And I notice this cold start problem where you're sitting on a bunch of data, but you don't know how to actually make sense of it and then actually package it together. I see startups face it. I see, some of our enterprise customers we work with very closely face it. We face it at Haptik when we're thinking about newer problems. How did you guys tackle that, particularly in the audience network, right? Because, okay, this is amazing because theoretically Facebook is able to build the models well. There's no doubt that you'll be able to serve the users better. But where did you start when you started thinking about, okay, look, how do we put this together?
Good question, actually. Very good question. In some ways, I feel like every one of these models which has worked at scale has had a little bit of a messy history. In the Facebook case, we had a lot of existing models trained on desktop data. And when you're kind of starting something, you're like, okay, we have this existing model. Let's just go use that, and we'll see where we get. And it has a baseline. But I think, one meta pattern that I've seen in a lot of these models is explore, exploit. I think in multiple ways. So one is how
explore, exploit.
Yeah, and one. So what I mean by that is you have a set of options. You don't know what you want to double down on. So with the approach that that I think about is how do you then figure out, hey, where is there heat? Where is there something which looks likely to succeed for you? And then when you find something which looks interesting, then how do you double down quickly and then go all in? You see this happening at multiple levels for example, in Facebook ads. This is actually how the ad algorithms, all ad servers really work. So for example, let's say, you target an ad right now on Facebook to all of the United States, right? A large set of people, Facebook has the United States. Now, how does Facebook know where to send those ads? So what Facebook's going to do, by this ridiculously oversimplified explanation, is it's going to try and send ads to different pockets of people. It's going to explore. Let's say you have a $1,000 budget. It might spend like, say, $20 to kind of send it to different people. And maybe 19 of those dollars get wasted. But then maybe $1, they're like, hey, these set of people, maybe, men over the age of 50 in this one state are clicking on those ads. Then you exploit that. Then you say, okay, fine, I'm going to spend the rest, $100 or, the rest of the budget on those people. So this kind of pattern, I think, is very common inside an algorithm. But I think at the meta level, it's also interesting when you think of how to approach this. So for example, in the audience network case, we had a few options. To be honest, I think if anybody familiar with Facebook ads knows, part of what makes Facebook ads work is personalization. A large part of also what makes it work is the data that you bring to Facebook. So for example, when you build a audience of people with an email list, for example, you upload it to Facebook and you say, hey, find me people who are similar to this, like a lookalike audience. So I don't want to get too ad techy here, but there's a different part of it. So when we started, we had a bunch of options, right? So we could say, okay, we can start with the Facebook desktop model, the desktop models that we are trained with. We could try out some new lookalike models. We could try and train a new model for just mobile alone. And what we tried to do, honestly, was to build prototypes as rough as we could, as quickly as we could, for multiple slices of this. And then we would just then send test traffic through to each one of this and just try and see, hey, is this working or not? So one day, for example, some sort of advertisers would get to see only the desktop models. Like these were machine learning models purely trained on desktop data alone. We had no idea whether those desktop users even had a mobile phone, whether they even clicking on mobile devices the same way they're desktop. We didn't know, right? But it was a good place to start. Another one which was purely based on interest. Another one which was purely based on email. And this, you can think of it as like machine learning prototyping, where we had like, some of our ML engineers / data scientists who would then build these very rough models, not too much sophistication in say feature engineering, not too much sophistication in like how to do this, but just to see, hey, is there something interesting here? Are we able to
expose those? You would expose those in the explore phase. You would actually like take very littles and actually expose those to the end customer, to the end users.
Yes, and we obviously had to make sure the end customer had a good experience. So we had to make sure that, because we were playing with real money, right? Like you had, well, in some cases we would give them refunds to be like, hey, you're a test customer, so we just want to get data. But mostly, there's real money involved. So it was about like running A/B tests. So we would say, okay, here's X part of the campaign, we're going to run with this model that we know of. Here's Y part of the campaign, we're going to run with this other model, and we just compare the results and we'll go from there. So for example, that led us to, by the way, I'm not a machine learning engineer myself, but that led us to, okay, these are the kinds of features that seem to work for us. Like about, for example, a year and a half in, we built very sophisticated machine learning models, which is all about how people interact on mobile phones, because we learned that how people interact on mobile phones is very different than how people interact on desktop. But that was because we had tried out different models, and we really easily learned that. I remember, I could be misremembering, but I remember that even a poorly trained mobile model was outperforming a really sophisticated desktop model. So, which kind of told us, okay, there's some heat here, let's go there. So, in some ways, it's kind of similar, I would say. Of course, it's like a platitude, all the devils in the details, but it's kind of similar to product development, where you have these MVPs. You have an MVP for, various cuts of data, various kinds of feature modeling. You want to get, feedback as quickly as possible as to whether there's something real here, and then go all in. That's kind of how we did things.
Yeah, and then very quickly, follow-on question there. And I know there's again similar thing, right? Lot of companies today, as big data and analytics and using big data is becoming relevant. One of the other things that people struggle with is the classic problem, right? Org structure and team structure, right? Because you have kind of machine learning engineers who, without any disrespect to anybody, sometimes, we hear from customers, that's like a research team, right? And how do you get them to think about customers and shape? And then, of course, there's, product leaders like you guys, right? Who are, of course, very focused on packaging it together. And sometimes, those two minds may not always see eye to eye. So, whatever, and maybe this is just a general question, even outside of maybe the Facebook experience, but across the board, across even companies that you see, particularly when it involves taking a large set of data and converting it into some intelligence and then translating into an end product. What are some of the team dynamics that you've seen actually work well?
That's a good question. In Facebook, I think every company has this kind of question, which is like, you have two formats. One, you have a central AI ML team, which kind of does all things AI ML, and they kind of act as a hub, and then you have a bunch of customer organizations, or you can go full stack, but then you don't really have shared services, and you can't take advantage of like building out shared infra because each person's off doing their own thing. I've seen both work. I would say in some ways it depends on the stage that your product is at. I strongly feel that when you're building something new from the ground up, you have to treat, I think when you're building something 0 to 1, and by the way, I don't have experience for like, much larger systems, so they're done for different types. When you're building something 0 to 1, you want to optimize for learning as quickly as possible. And I think the best way to do that is to have that function sit alongside you or be on the same Zoom calls as you every single day. So that might mean just having a really smart data scientist, that might having me ML engineer for two things. One is to expose them to the dynamics of the product, the customer, what the rest of the team is learning. Two is for the product manager engineer to understand what is possible and not possible. Because a lot of us, who don't have AI experience,
we think, why is that so hard?
Yeah, why is it so hard? You don't really know the bounds of what is possible. Even I think a lot of product managers have an engineering background. So you kind of have a rough spidey sense for, well, what is going to take a year to build and what is going to take a weekend to build. So you have a rough spidey sense over time. But at ML, for example, let's say you are working on a self-driving startup, and you're like, well, can you detect a street sign in the snow? Is that hard? Is that really hard? No, not hard. I think it takes some time to build that intuition. So I think when you're building 0 to 1, I would try and find ways to get people be as vertical stack as possible so you can optimize the learning experience faster. So I think every organization kind of ping pongs between two states. One is you go everything full stack and you're building everything custom per team. And the other is, hey, you're going to have this common team which acts as, say, the AI team or the ML infrastructure team and everyone's a customer service. It really depends on the stage of product. But for me, if you're building something new, I really say, like, even if you're building something hacky, you're building something custom, you're two people who are not building anything that's taken share to anybody else. I think that very integrated, tight feedback loop is really important. But by the way, I would caveat that by saying all of my experience is building these large consumer products. The dynamics may be different if you have a legacy product, dynamic may be different for enterprise customers. But for consumer products, I think that feedback loop is super critical.
Sure. No, that's super helpful, man. I love this explore and exploit sort of framework. I think that's super helpful. Guys, please start with the questions. Like I promised, the time will fly by. So yeah, please keep the questions coming and we'll get to it in about 10 minutes. So Sriram, switching gears to consumer and Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. And I know you had a lot of fun over there, except of course, being one of the earlier ones to get the blue tick.
Oh my gosh. Wow, you really know your history.
Yes, yeah, I remember. I was like, oh my God, there's a blue tick. How do I get it? And it was like everybody started talking about the same thing. For
the record, I have, even now, I get like, when I was at Twitter, I got like at least like 10 emails a day from somebody who wants to get verified. Sometimes legitimate, sometimes just crazy. Even now, after the interview, I still get emails, and I'm like, "Hey, folks, I don't work there anymore. I can't really help you."
Yeah. No, I've heard those. I've heard those stories and seen some of it on Twitter itself. But Twitter, from what I understand, you had a completely different problem, but a very similar possible approach, right? There, you were working on products that were directly customer facing, that directly customers were using as part of the feed. But I guess when you enter Twitter as well, even they had this entire kind of almost like, what do we do with this data problem, right? Where, okay,
Right.
look, there's just so much interaction on the feed. There's so much happening on Twitter. Where what does Twitter? I remember this was probably the time. What is Twitter, right? Is Twitter a little bit like Facebook? Is Twitter going to become like Instagram? Is Twitter news? And I think a lot of, when you were there, I think things became a little bit more clear for the company itself. But taking the same analogy of Facebook, how did you, and especially when it came to direct to consumer facing features, at that point, what were some of the things that you built? And again, how did you utilize that massive pool of data that Twitter had, which honestly they weren't doing a great job using initially?
A good question. I was thinking about this question because you shared some of these topics that we're going to discuss today. And so first, I'll set it in the context. So Twitter, for the longest time, was not doing any ranking. The idea was you log into Twitter and you basically see whatever anyone has tweeted, reverse chronologically sorted. With really, and there's no ranking or algorithms beyond.
And then after that, you build the algorithm, and then people were like, no, I want to see it chronologically.
Yeah, so this is the story of my life for the last few years. So there's actually some very interesting thing there, which I think will be interesting to a lot of folks on this call too, which I think goes to the heart of AI. So context, just to set up the context there. So about 3.5 years ago, Twitter built out ranking similar to, I think, other companies, where when you log on to Twitter, it tries to guess what is most interesting to you based on what you would interact with in the past, and then try and show that to you. Now, first, from an infrastructure perspective, this is really challenging for Twitter because Twitter was built as a text service. All right, it's kind of similar to SMS texting. That's kind of the origin of Twitter. So every piece of infrastructure was built on push. And the idea was every time you tweet, it just goes to everyone. So ranking things was hard because you needed to have a sense of what was in everyone's feed. So in some ways, when people ask hey, why is building edit tweets so hard? Or why is building ranking so hard? It's like, imagine they say Airtel or some text provider having to build editing of text, because the whole infrastructure was built to push, and that's it. Now on ranking itself, in some ways, I think we did some very simple things. We said, okay, hey, we're going to look at who have you interacted with in the past, who have you, what kind of content you have liked, whose kind of content you have, whose content you like, and we're going to show you more of that. Now, I think there are a few things here which are very interesting. The first one is, I think one of the lessons I've learned from Twitter is you need to be really crisp about what you're optimizing for. So at Twitter, we said, okay, hey, if a tweet gets more engagement, I'm very oversimplifying here, but the more likes, retweet, shares, we're going to show you more of it because we think it's a better tweet. And if a tweet doesn't get engagement at all, it's probably not as good a tweet as something which gets more likes. Now, the challenge, I think, with that is sometimes things which can be very unhealthy, things that spark really negative emotion or helpful or hateful, can also get a lot of likes and retweets and engagement. So in some ways, I think this is one of the questions about anybody building AI solutions is to think about what your core optimization algorithm is, because any AI engineer, ML engineer can build an optimization function and try and build a model to keep the optimization function. But it's worth examining what is the real thing you want to optimize for. So, but Twitter, what now they're trying to do, and is trying to push more towards healthy conversation, where we want people to interact with each other, where we want people to discuss things with each other. And so it's not just about hey, there's something that likes and retweets. There's something spark a conversation. So I think one of the lessons I learned there was about this notion of it's very easy to build, a thing which optimizes for a particular function or particular objective, but you need to be very crisp about is this a thing that you really want for your business? And I think there's a lot of art there, and getting it wrong can cause interesting issues. That is one. The second thing, I think you just kind of joked about it, but I think there's something real there. When we launched the algorithm, the first thing to start trending the next day was RIP Twitter, rest in peace Twitter. Because there's a lot of people who, to put it mildly, were not happy with the launch. And I think there are a few things here. First was there was change aversion. Hey, they were hey, look, I'm happy with what I have. I don't want to do something.
That's like when Facebook launched their news feed. That's like when Snap launched their redesign. That the change aversion is common, right?
Change aversion. The second thing was, I think in some ways, there's a sense of every product has, different kinds of users, and the power users of Twitter, and I think I'm one of them, had really optimized their usage. They knew exactly who to follow. They knew exactly how to navigate it. And in some ways, they almost didn't really need ranking because they could do it themselves. But on the other hand, somebody who was not really familiar with Twitter or was maybe using it once a month really need tracking, because if you log into it, say once a month, having an algorithm which showed you all the best tweets was dramatically better than you just seeing what are the tweets of the last few hours. So in some ways, the people who were most vocal were not the people who needed it. And third, and I think this is most interesting, is people didn't really know how it worked and didn't feel like they were in control.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think Jack has been pushing Twitter for is, and Jack believes that recommendation algorithms and AI is going to be the future of how we build most of technology. But for it to work, he thinks they need two things. One, it needs to be explainable. And the second is people need to feel in control. So in Twitter, I don't know whether you folks have noticed, about a year and a half ago, we launched this thing which shows up as a lightning bolt in the top right, which switches your timeline away from ranking and just shows you latest tweets.
They got it back, correct.
Yes. The idea behind doing that was because you could now see how Twitter looks like without AI. You could now see what Twitter looks like without an algorithm. So you had control. So I think that sense of control is important, because all of a sudden you had a choice. It was not that Twitter was forcing this on you. It was giving you a choice and say, hey, look, if you don't like it, you can go, just go back the old ways and it's fine. But hopefully you now see the benefits. And I think that sense of conveying the benefits and conveying a sense of control is super, super important in terms of showing you, like, getting people familiar with AI. And I think in some ways that's something which Twitter has been ahead of the curve on. I don't think, I would love to see this from more tech companies, right? Like, imagine if there was like in a world where a lot of people are like not as trusting of tech companies, and there have been lots of questions about AI biases, kind of like downstream impact of algorithms, especially in the consumer space. I think it's really important for people to feel like control and to feel like, hey, they can always opt out if they don't need it. I think that's one.
So interesting. Sorry to cut you short, but
yeah.
that is so interesting and revealing. And I can tell that maybe Twitter was one of the only products that would have really seen this play out. Because even at Haptik, one of the things that sometimes even I talk about is that, but it's harder for us to execute, is people don't want too much magic, and it almost is one of those things where you have to carefully get them used to the magic, very step by step. And if if everything happens just seamlessly, automatically, then they almost get spooked out. And that analogy of kind of Twitter, of where it was at a point where I remember that, right? Because I was a power user of Twitter that time too, and I had set this up really well. Like, I knew who to follow, what to do, and suddenly one day I opened, I'm like, what just happened? I mean, how do I change this? And the first thing most of us did that time was go to settings to see that, look, is there like a switch back?
Oh gosh,
how can
that setting was the bane of my existence. That setting was so terrible. With I remember that. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So most of us, that's what we did. We went to settings to see, hey, listen, how do I get some control back? And that's super interesting. And back to your point about kind of Jack alluding to that, right? Which is that, yes, the world will move kind of being very AI and recommendation first, but how do you ensure that it can be explainable, and how do you ensure that it's something that people can control? I mean, even if you look at virtual agents and kind of voice and some of the things coming around, I guess one of the reasons why, out of all the virtual assistants ever built in the world, maybe Alexa has worked to a certain degree, is because because voice is so natural, and because it does very basic things like turn on lights, turn off lights, it's a lot easier to understand.
Yeah, I think one analogy I think about is email. So I don't know about you folks, but I haven't really looked into my Gmail spam folder for a long time. I mostly assume that, and by the way, I can't remember the last time Gmail showed me a spam email, like one of those, terrible, pills, or one of those things, which maybe 15 years ago, we used to get all the time. And one of the things I think it's interesting, right?
And now it's happening. And by the way, now it's happening with the promotions tab.
Yes.
Like, the same thing is happening with the promotions tab, where, there was a point in time where I would check it like, once maybe a week. I don't know the last time I checked that. So I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
So in some ways, it's an interesting behavior change. Like 15 years ago, there was no trust around anti-spam algorithms, right? People would always be like, check your spam folder. These days, somebody says, check my spam folder. I'm like, dude, like, it's come out. Like, I trust Gmail. Yes. But over time, what is Gmail done? Gmail has won our trust by basically repeatedly being consistent about good behavior. And it's kind of won our trust over time. So in some ways, I think you need to win people's trust over time. And then imagine, for example, if you told somebody, hey, can I turn off Google's algorithm and just see like a list of links? People like, that's crazy, right? Like, because we trust those algorithms because they won our trust over time. And in Twitter's case, Twitter hadn't won people's trust yet. So we needed to win people's trust. And one of the ways to win people's trust, I think, is this. I think the other one is about explainability. So, for example, one of the things I think, which Facebook did a few years ago was when you go to when you see an ad on Facebook, if you hit the top right arrow, it'll show you why you saw a particular ad. It'll say, hey, this advertiser targeted you because you were part of some email list, or it targeted you because you are male who like sports, etc., etc. And that was interesting because without that, and still now, people are like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing an ad, this is creepy, Facebook is following me all over the web. That still exists, but that feature went a long way in telling people, hey, this ad is showing up to you because of X, Y, and Z. And I think this is a pattern which I would love for a lot more people. For example, I think, when I was reading this recent news article about, Amazon being asked questions about like, hey, why does an Amazon product show up in Amazon search results instead of, some other third-party products? Is Amazon biasing third party? Even Google gets these days. So like when you search for a Google result, you get a yellow.
And especially on travel these days, right? When you search for flights, Google is now reporting everything within the results versus taking you to like a booking.
Exactly. And maybe, by the way, I really, I have a lot of friends at Google. I think they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to optimize for the right customer experience. But in some way, they haven't won people's trust yet. And they're not explaining to people, hey, we are showing this Google result instead of, say, this travel site, or Amazon's picking an Amazon Basics product instead of some other third-party product because we think it's objectively better for you. Now, this is a really hard problem. How do you communicate this really black box, deeply deep trained machine learning model into something which looks like 2 lines of text? It's an incredibly challenging problem, which is why I think like AI explainability is one of the most interesting areas for me, because people are going to be like, so imagine, for example, you and I grew up, my wife's dad worked in a bank as a bank manager. And one of his jobs was to deal with loans. Like people would come in, like small businesses, and he would have to like judge them. And, there was a process, but a lot of it is also like human, right? Like he would be like, well, he kind of uses personal judgment to give somebody a loan or not. And people kind of understood like, how that works. They understood like, you'd have like, oh, well, this bank is a good person for X, this person not, and you kind of built a mental model. Now, a lot of that is going online, and you hit a website, you submit your data, and it's going to, give you back some really critical information. Maybe you get approved for a bank loan or not, which could really dramatically change your life. And how do you explain that? Like, do you explain, hey, you don't have enough credit history, or you don't have, your business doesn't show enough traction? I think finding a way to explain that back to people is going to be important. Now, one, because it's such important like people's lives, but two, for people to trust that these algorithms are doing the right thing. Anyway, I could go on forever about this.
It's super interesting. I think this is actually, you should, if not already, you should do like a blog post or a tweet storm or something around this. I think it's a super interesting area because, and maybe we can talk separately, but it's so interesting because at Haptik, we just recently built something to this tune where if the chatbot doesn't get something right, it's trying to explain to the user why it did not get it right? In the same sort of notion, because we realize that by just saying, I don't get your query or I don't understand what you're saying, people were like, dude, this is dumb. But if you tell them that, okay, look, this is why I did not get it. Maybe you want to try something else. And we're calling this kind of like smart AI assist. We're realizing that the conversion rates are a lot better. People are like, okay, look, I understand why this could go wrong. So they're a bit more empathetic to actually dealing with the machine as well.
Yeah, but it's amazing. Like, I have a 19-month-old at home. I was telling Aakrit about, she's just started to walk. She now says, hey, Google, but she said like, hey, Juju, and she tries to get it to play a song. So she has this kind of like this mental model that if she says those words and mentions a song, and she hasn't get the pronunciation just yet, which we're thankful for.
Very soon.
My Google Assistant just fired up here. But she has a mental model. So I think those mental models are critical, because then, okay, you know what? I can say, hey, Google, stop. Sorry, I just triggered that right here. I think those mental models are critical for people to start trusting AI.
Cool. We have a bunch of questions. So let's see. I'm going to start taking a couple, and then kind of we'll go sort of step by step. Let's see. So a little bit, I think you touched upon this, but this whole term around recommendation engine and AI recommendations is now abused for as long as I think you and I have been working in tech, right? For the first time, I started working in my first startup back, 13 years back. it was like, oh, we're going to use recommendation engine to serve better ads. We're going to use recommendation engine to serve better feeds. Where do you think this whole recommendation narrative is? Like, do you think that now do you think things are getting better? Do you think it's just something hard to do? Do you think it falls in that explainable bucket? And also, why is it not quite taken off as much as maybe people expected it to?
Well, I'm not sure. Well, a few things. First, I think, in some ways, I think like we've done with the first generation of recommendation system. The first generation of recommendation systems are these very naive algorithms which said, okay, I'm going to look at, some things you've liked, and I'm going to start recommending more of those things, and we go from there. So, whether it be links at the bottom, there was a few years where everybody had like links at the bottom of a page, or, like similar sites. And that was like the thing. I think the challenge now is that is now table stakes. Everyone has that. And the question I think now is, one, is that a good consumer product experience? So for example, TikTok is very interesting to me. It's been in the news lot over the last couple of months. So if you look at TikTok, I think TikTok, one of the reasons for TikTok's success, and of course, we'll see what happens now with all the bans and whatnot. Sure. But one of the reasons for their success is they avoided a huge design flaw that Instagram and Twitter did. Twitter and Instagram said, hey, here's the follow graph. You should follow a bunch of people or accounts, and based on that, we will show you content, right? That's kind of the game. Now, there's a problem with that. Imagine this whole universe of content on Twitter that Twitter can show you. And then there's the follow graph. Let's say you follow 100 people. Now, we have this problem. We can show you all this amazing content, but you're only choosing to follow these 100 people. So we're always trying to figure, hey, please follow more people. Trust us. Please, just believe us. This person is really good for you. So you're always in this game because the product is you only follow people. And TikTok, by the way, which one of the reasons I think, was because they had much better AI, and they had the video format lent to the better AI. They said, look, the follow graph is there, but it's not really that interesting. What we're going to do is we're going to start showing you content right up. You open up the app without sign up, without username, nothing. You just
start seeing videos.
Yeah, you start seeing videos. And you know what? You just do whatever you want. You watch the video, you swipe up, you heart it, don't heart it, maybe you dislike it, you turn off the app. You just do what you do, and the algorithm will train itself. Now, this has a bunch of advantages. Right off the bat, it solves the problem that Twitter has, which is, hey, how do we get you to follow people? You don't have the problem anymore. You can just show the next video. That was very important. The second one is, at Twitter and Instagram, people don't follow the accounts that are actually good for them, right? Which is one of the challenges ranking. So one of the, and there's, by the way, when I was at Twitter, I could never really say this. The truth is, it's really hard for people to know what accounts are actually things that they like. For example, like what we'd often find is people follow a bunch of celebrity
That's so true. I'm just thinking about it right now that, so many of the accounts that I end up following today have been because of actually the Twitter ranking algorithm, because now I see a bunch of tweets from people who I don't directly follow, but people have liked, because I don't know which ones I'm going to like.
Yeah. So what happens is people sometimes follow a celebrity, right? Because they think they know the person. Yeah. But celebrities sometimes are not good at Twitter. They may not be fun. They may not be interesting. So you follow people you know, but they're not the people who are interesting to you. So so the TikTok solves all of that by basically, look, we're just going to show you video. You swipe up and you're going to show you more. That's one. The second thing is, I think one way to think of a lot of these AI systems is like running an economy, right? So you have a marketplace, right? You have producers, which is like data, right? I'm forgetting consumer apps. There's a producer of data coming in, and there are consumers of data. In this case, the person watching the video. Now, you are like, the Fed chair or the RBI governor, where you can manipulate this economy. So one of the things TikTok does, which is very powerful, is they say anybody can become rich on any given day. In Instagram, it's impossible for you to go from 0 to 1 million followers on one day. It's almost impossible because you have to get 1 million followers, get to 1 million people follow you. It's impossible. But on TikTok, any new person knows that they can just go viral immediately. And that is very powerful because when you're building these systems, it's like there is a promise that you can be famous, or to use my economy example, that you can become rich. And one of the problems I think Twitter and Instagram have with their AI systems is their algorithms don't let new people actually accumulate currency, which I think is one of the side effects of AI systems, which is when you bring in new people and new data in, how do you make sure? Yeah, so I think that's another interesting phenomenon. So anyways, I think in some ways, I think of the V1 of recommendation systems as a solved problem now. And I think the interesting things are on V2, which is without a follow list, with more AI explainability, with much more control, figuring out problems like AI biases. How do you handle it? So, for example, one of the things I think about for AI biases is, there's a recent story about, some a large tech company which refused to offer services to a particular demographic, in a particular neighborhood, because they were like, hey, there's a lot of crime. It's a low income neighborhood, which was, you can see how an AI algorithms are trained that way. From a human perspective, it seems really weird. Like, why can't people from a particular neighborhood get services? So I think that's another interesting problem. So I think that is where the future recommendation systems are, to solve these higher level issues.
No, that's incredible. And yeah, we could chat about, just those different social media platforms. I actually didn't notice this until you told me this right now. The whole TikTok versus the other, and actually all of the short video apps that have kind of cloned TikTok and followed have also employed the same model that TikTok did, right? Because they just sort of realized that. We'll switch gears and talk a little bit more generic. There's a very interesting question, which I'm guessing every product manager in the world has, which is, how much of product innovation would you say, if you had to choose between three buckets, and let's stick to 0 to 1 at this point, is intuition driven, research driven, data driven, like particularly 0 to 1. Obviously 1 to n, I'm guessing a lot of it is data, a lot of it is research, because you have the data and the customers. But especially when you're thinking about some of these problems that we were speaking about at Facebook and Twitter, how much of what would you, if you had to put like buckets of, okay, look, a lot of it is, like you said, explore, intuition, a lot of it is research and data, and the third being data. How would you bucket these three?
In some ways, I'm not sure these are the right buckets, because I feel like any 0 to 1 product has some elements of all of the above, where, like, for example, intuition might be because you hit a problem somewhere and it's just annoying you and you're like, hey, why don't I just make it better? Is it intuition or user research? Like, I don't know. I would say, if I can offer different framing, I would say a lot of product innovation happens because they have a very quick learning loop, where you launch something, you are trying out something along with your test customers, where maybe they're enterprise customers, maybe they're consumer product, maybe they're friends, I don't really care. And you're learning very, very quickly. And I think if I could pattern match on the successful 0 to 1 products I've seen, that's where a lot of success lies. So, and honestly, I've seen enough of all three. I think I've seen variants of all three. I think honestly, these three are less interesting. I would ask, how do you very, very quickly go figure out whether what you're building is interesting, whether it solves a real problem, whether people actually want to use it, whether, what you're doing is even like, a solution worth exploited, given our explore exploit framework. I think that's a lot more interesting. But honestly, all three of these are pretty valid. It's really hard for me to segment the three.
Yeah. No, I think fair enough. One question.
What do you think? I mean, you've seen a lot of this, right? What do you think?
It's hard, man. See, I'll tell you, and I think it varies a little bit, and I'll quickly answer because with the sake of time. I think it also slightly varies between consumer, mid-market, B2B, enterprise. I think it's just harder to get that learning loop going in enterprise as fast. When you're selling to customers, where typically your average adoption cycle is 3 to 6 months, to get that learning loop becomes a lot harder. On the consumer side, absolutely, right? I think you can quickly churn out stuff and learn a little bit faster. But I do think that even in the enterprise, for example, like us, and even I know for a fact, a lot of other data augmentation, AI, intelligence companies are trying to find almost like, think of it like, think of it like isolated experiment sets, right? Where and they mimic the behavior of an enterprise internally, right? Such that their experimentation loop becomes a lot faster. Because if you had to build something small, then go to like a geo, for example, and tell them, hey, look, I want to experiment with this. By the time you'll see your first results is at least 6 to 8 weeks. And then, you're also dependent on somebody else kind of adopting it the right way. So I think one of the things that companies like us are trying to do is trying to mimic that behavior internally in some shape or form to make experimentation a little faster.
Yeah.
But no, I'm totally with you there. I think a lot of it has to do with, the framework that you put versus sort of, in the.
Yeah, honestly, I think, the person asking the question, like, I hope you don't see this like me dodging the question. I think the challenge is like, I've seen like all of these work. I have seen, for example, my Facebook audience network example, I don't know which category it goes in. I had an idea, but that came because we had spoken to some people, but it also came because we had seen some data. So I don't know, even probably the most successful thing I worked on, I don't know which bucket it goes into. So, which is why I think that my sense is every successful 0 to 1 product has elements of all three.
Yeah. We got a couple of minutes, but I had one question which we didn't get to, and perhaps it's a good time to sort of, end with this, and I'm sure everybody's very interested. So, and I remember when you and I chatted a few weeks back, I remember telling you that, today you're having a lot of fun, right? You're in a great spot where you're doing what you want. You're working with so many startups. You're investing, advising. You're helping companies or people like me whenever it comes down to it. And every product, and I have to say this with some caveat, but I'm guessing every product, every startup that you are looking at, working with, advising, helping, investing in, is obviously using some framework or some element of intelligence and AI. I mean, now it's like pretty much across the board, right? Big data, using it. What are some of the most exciting examples you're seeing? Using data really well for intelligence and building some systems on top which are actually working.
Well, this might be an obvious answer, but I think the most interesting thing I've seen recently is GPT-3 from OpenAI. And I think, so for those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically a system where you can give it some small piece of text, and then it's going to generate output for you based on that text. So imagine, for example, giving it like a line of a poem, and then it tries to generate the rest of the poem, or a line of some dialogue, just starts dialogue, yada, yada. And I think it's very interesting. It's very rough, very early. I think it's going to be a while before you build practical applications, so we'll see. But I think the reason it is interesting is it's a new kind of black box that you have to manipulate. For those of you who have played with it, and if you haven't, I highly suggest like trying to get access to it. OpenAI people are really good about getting access to people who want to play with it. Is you have to figure out how to manipulate a machine, but you don't totally understand how the machine works. Because you can, and once you give it like a few examples, like for example, the questions that people have asked in the chat right here that I see in front of me, I'm pretty sure if I give some of these questions, it's actually going to spit back a reasonable answer. Yes. Some of the questions, but not the others. So you have to figure out why some questions. Is it because some of those content already exists on the web? Some of these questions already exist on the web. So that's why it's able to train better. And you can start to understand how to manipulate the system. So I think that whole space of creating content based on the web as a corpus, I think that is really, really interesting to me. I think that's one. I think the second space I think is really interesting is both, I would say, the dark and the light side of deepfakes, which is, on the dark side, obviously, there's all these questions about, hey, deepfakes, how do people manipulating content, making it sound like, politicians or celebrities saying or doing things that they're not. Obviously, a lot of, obvious problems when you do that happen. But on the other hand, imagine a world where, and we're already seeing this, a movie where the actors don't have to be physically there to actually shoot content. Or being able to, for example, this very conversation that we did, imagine if you and I just typed out all of everything we said, and and video automatically generated like the visual of us speaking. Yeah. So I think
I wish I could do that for everything I do. Like running the company, doing my one-on-ones, like even doing sales calls, right?
Yeah, Aakrit GPT-3 right there, right? Like what did Aakrit say? I think like those things are really interesting because I think that's like a new kind of content format where you can almost abstract out human beings and generate like all new interesting content. I think there's going to be fun like on the entertainment side. There's going to be fun customer support. Like for example, imagine talking to a doctor, but being able to kind of generate the visuals, but without having to have the human being there live with you. I think both GPT-3 and everything around deepfakes. Deepfakes is kind of a negative word, but I think the technology I think is super interesting to me.
I know we're out of time, but there's one question that we have to take because it's super interesting. And thanks for whoever asked that question, because I think about this a lot, and I know there's some people here. How can data scientists think more like product managers when building intelligence-based products?
Good question. I would say, one of my sort of things that I always thought about, hold true is I believe all these roles, PM, engineer, data scientists, are very fluid. And I always encourage my teams and folks who work with me, I would try and like be flex into other roles. For example, as a PM, I try to be really good at like, Jupyter, running SQL queries, doing some data science myself. My engineers are always product oriented. I think for a few reasons. One is, one, you just bring a lot more utility to the team when you can do that. But two, I think it gives you a sense of empathy for what everyone else is doing. So, by the way, I've never been a data scientist. I don't have a background data scientist, but so this is me projecting. But I would say, in some ways, try and think like a PM by trying to figure out like what your PM does. So, for example, right, what is the PM at the heart of it? What does the PM do? A PM is trying to figure out what does the customer want, what do they really want, what exists out in the market, and then what should you build to go address it. That's the heart of it. That's what people do. So if you're a data scientist, I would say try and do that. Let me give you the consumer examples, right? If you're building a consumer product and you're a data scientist, go and use every single member of the competition. Go and talk to a few users. Go and read, if your app, read every review in the app store for your app, for the competitor's app. Get an empathetic sense of the space. And then, so when there's a conversation, I think it does two things. I think the worst kind of data scientists or data scientists who, junior devs often don't, is when you wait for somebody to ask you a question, and you kind of just more where like a PM asks you a question, you're like, hey, why did this graph drop previous day? I don't think that's as useful. What's way more interesting is like, hey, you know what? I saw a bunch of customers leaving these reviews, and so I did some data sciencing, and I figured out like actually we have this problem or this opportunity, and bring it to the table. And I think that can only happen when you think like a PM. So I would say talk to customers, play with the competition. In some cases, try and do what your PM does. So a lot of what your PM does, like run a few meetings that you can do yourself. Try and get in touch with your engineers. So I would say, try and play a proxy play as much as possible, especially around product. And I think, your PMs at least will really appreciate it.
That's awesome. That's a great takeaway, Sriram, for I think all of us. But no, I mean, like I said, the session flew by. We've gone way over, but this was super fun. I think it was great. Just chatting about all the things you've done, and I think it was super helpful for everybody who joined. Hope this was fun for you too.
Thank you so much again. Thanks so much for having me. If everyone listening, look, thank you for the time. If you have more, just hit me up. I'm at Twitter at Sriram K. My website, where you can find my email is sriramk.com. Hit me up if I can help you with anything at all. But thanks everyone, and also thanks Aakrit. Congratulations again on all the success. Let me ask you a question. When are we?
There we go.
Next Reliance AGM, are we going to see Aakrit on stage?
No, the plan is to get a deepfake GPT-3, right? I mean, that's the next goal in life.
I love it. Good answer.
That's how we love doing really nice AGMs. We love doing great demos at AGM. So yeah, that's the plan. I mean, I think that's been the biggest takeaway for me out of this talk. So I'm going to start working on that now.
Good answer right there. But hey, thank you so much. This is amazing. Awesome. But thanks for having me.
Take care, man. Be safe in San Francisco.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.